What I just do here today is really get to focus on how to build AI that can be trusted. Okay. So before I get to my personal journey, I just want to call out a few things that, in addition to what's here on the slide, you probably have seen all the headlines, okay, about the backlash of algorithms in the healthcare context. We've seen a flood of that in the aftermath of the tragic shooting. Underlying all that are numerous lawsuits about the accuracy of the Medicaid algorithm that United Healthcare and other healthcare providers are using. I just read this week that General Motors, Mary Barrera, decided to pull the electronic vehicle robo-taxi project. It was supposed to bring 50 billion in revenue to the company, but after the algorithm misidentified a prone person lying on the ground that had been hit by a real car, hit and run, but when the robo-taxi did not recognize that as a human being, and drove over that person to serious injury. The CEO, Mary Barrera, had to pull there was so much bad press, she had to pull the entire project, even though it was supposed to bring 50 billion in revenue. She pulled it at a $500 million loss to the company. And I just read this week that it is not going to be resuscitated. It got pulled about a year ago. What else is going on? Rite Aid in bankruptcy right now because, in part, because its vendors' AI was misidentifying paying customers as criminals. We have a logistics company that had an embarrassing situation happen, which we'll talk more about later. And derivative actions are naming board members specifically in relation to cyber AI and privacy incidents. And as Christine articulated, I decided to devote my life to a different vision. I'm trying to get us all to imagine a situation where we've got effective governance in place. You can sleep at night, not worrying whether the other shoe is going to drop or if there's unintended consequences associated with your AI or technology or digital transformation use cases. What if you could actually imagine you have state-of-the-art data practices that actually are a differentiator for your brand and attract customers and employees to you? Well, that's exactly what we want to get to so we can stop imagining and get to practical steps that do exist to ensure that your AI is absolutely deployed in an amazing way. And that's the reason why I started my company. We're going to go into it in greater detail, but the idea is to provide actionable insights and perspectives here on AI so you can get to effective governance. And I'm really going to be interested in your feedback afterwards if you get there. So now getting to my personal journey, I graduated from undergrad in 1988 from Brown University with an international relations and French civilization major, nothing to do with tech. I went straight to law school. I went to Georgetown because of my interest in international affairs. In 1998, I worked for a boutique law firm with about 70 attorneys that did a ton of work for, back then, a new company, Yahoo. One of our former associates went over to Yahoo to head litigation. Well, first of all, to work in litigation and then head litigation. And then ultimately, John Sobel became their general counsel. I raised that because we were over-indexed in that 70-person firm with privacy, cyber, and data issues. I then went on in 2019 went on to another firm, founded the data privacy and cyber practices in multiple big law firms. But in 2019, I represented the CEO of the Cal Chamber of Commerce, Alan Zarenberg, and his negotiations with the proponent of the California Consumer Privacy Act. And that led to my first book called Transform that I self-published. And then in 2020 and 2022, I wrote two other books called Implementing the California Consumer Privacy Act, but it was based on not just the California law, but looking at where California sat in connection with the 161 other countries and jurisdictions with data protection laws. And then moving on to 2023, where my book, Trust, Responsible AI, Privacy, and Data Leadership was published. Oops, let me get to Really honored that the book received an award at the Frankfurt Book Prize in October. And then, as I was mentioning earlier in the pre-chat, to be recognized in innovation by Forbes 50 over 50 in the innovation category this year. And I've got a lot of awards in my life. I'm really fortunate and honored to have received one recently as a Privacy Vanguard Award from the International Association of Privacy Professionals. This is one of 37 awards I've received in my career. And this one really touches me because it's a group of my peers. So I have trained over 50,000 executives such as yourselves, and National Association of Corporate Directors, NASDAQ. Conscious Capitalism, I was there with Christine and at the invitation of Itesh, Diligent, MIT, MTech, Berkeley Haas School of Business, Harvard Business School, Society for Corporate Governance. And what I have learned in all that is that data is now a C-suite and board issue. It's a non-delegable issue in terms of oversight. The people on this phone call can really set the tone of whether at the fork in the road, whether your data initiatives go to AI success or you go into kind of an AI shadow land of a bunch of harms that we talked about earlier at the outset. So I want to focus you on this year's Davos, and the next 2025 is coming up shortly in a couple months. But this year, in January, at Davos's Global Risk, the Global Risk Report that the World Economic Forum announces every year at Davos, for the very first time, even though AI technology has been around for over 50 years, for the very first time, AI, and particularly generative AI, was listed as a top 10 global risk around the world for its capacity to disrupt economic markets, political systems, and also a big focus on cyber risks and privacy risks. Okay. So boardrooms around the country are having these conversations in multiple companies, like the same one that I'm having with you. So I'm going to tell you about a few trends, but I want to emphasize that I'm talking about the EU, Colorado, the White House, and we have a new administration coming up. But the important thing for you to know is this is a tsunami of consensus around governance in 100 countries, 6 continents. So if anybody says innovation, legislation is going to block innovation or legislation is behind innovation, I would argue it's the opposite. We have draft legislation that is anticipating where you're going to need to build your data. All right, what is underlying all of these trends? The underlying focus is that humans should control AI, not the other way around. They don't want you to be surprised, as the state of Tennessee was when it received a decision from a court in August after spending 5 years working with a major public accounting consulting firm and spending $400 million on their AI algorithm to distribute Medicaid benefits. The state of Tennessee was surprised to hear a judge rule in August that the algorithm was incorrect in denying coverage about 91% of the time. So after the state spent $400 million and did everything that they thought was right and hired the accounting team to work on this and spent this money, they're now needing to rebuild the entirety of it. So we don't want those kinds of surprises. And that's why the legislation is saying they want your company and humans, you in it, in oversight to control the AI, not the other way around by being startled and surprised. So how do we get there? I call this a rubric for trust, and it starts with the T for trust stands for triage. In other words, risk ranking your AI. Think of this like getting to a cross section in an intersection. When we drive our cars around the world, whether it's Africa, LATAM, Asia, Europe, when we see a red light, we know that we need to tap the brakes. Underlying that red light is actually a lot of laws, study, insurance, crash accident research to decide when the red light should go on in an intersection. But all we know instinctively is when that red light is there, we need to tap the brakes. It's the exact same thing with AI. The EU AI Act, which is enacted already, and multiple other draft pieces of legislation around the world have a list of prohibited AI. Consider that like your red light. Every board member, every CEO, every C-suite member should know what those prohibited areas are. There's 17 of them. I'll give you some examples, but a free list of all 17 currently is on my personal website, which is Dominique Shelton Leipzig.com. You can download a free chapter of my book, and that list is there. But everybody should know what those are. But things like continuously monitoring people in public spaces when you're not part of the government, when it's your private company doing that, is an example of a prohibited type of AI. Prohibited AI must stop, by the way, in Europe by February 2nd. All right. Low risk AI. Think of that like the green light. What regulators around the world are saying, when you're in low risk, things like product suggestions, when you're, on a film website and they're suggesting certain films, those sorts of things are considered low risk, because 90% of the time, those of us who are on the internet have already been interacting with some kind of AI in that capacity. It might have been predictive and not generative, but the idea is the incremental use of adding generative AI to the mix makes it relatively low risk. All right, so there's a green light. It's relatively safe to go into the intersection there.
And Dominique, one thing that I've seen in a few places is C-suites and maybe boards get afraid of AI, and so they reduce risk by prohibiting its use. And I was just talking to a woman, her entire company is prohibited from using AI because they feel threatened by it. But I would say that is a false low risk, because you're really putting your entire company at risk by not using it and not understanding it and embracing it. You're sort of kicking the risk can down the road, and it's higher as a result of that. Any thoughts on that?
100%. So look, every piece of our lives, education, elder care, financial, your business operations, supply chain, are going to be impacted with AI. And I would argue that board, that company that thinks they're not using AI is probably actually already using AI, okay? Because whether you ban it as an organization or not, your vendors are going to be using it, your employees are going to be using it. And it's really what we're getting to here is the governance and the steps necessary to make sure that you have the good outcomes with AI that we talked about, and I'll talk more about, rather than the negative headlines. But someone put it this way: you don't want to be like a travel agent when Expedia comes in. And that kind of disruption is underway and will be underway with AI. So if your company is not thinking about how it can grow with AI, leveraging AI, finding the use cases that can lead to exponential growth with AI, not just cost cutting and small things, but getting to a comfort level with your governance so that you can deploy at scale to have exponential growth, then you're leaving opportunity on the table and risking, quite honestly, being disrupted. We just saw a learning, was it Cheng? I forgot the name of the educational service that was doing tutorial work during the pandemic, and they're now about to be delisted and almost out of business because of AI and the AI-enabled searching that is going on. Okay, let me give you an example of prohibited AI. I talked about one earlier, but I'm going to play this clip from Black Mirror, and it's an episode called Nosedive, which is another example of prohibited AI.
Nosedive. Nosedive is a satire on acceptance and the image of ourselves we like to portray and project to others. It stars Bryce Dallas Howard, who's fantastic, and she's playing a character called Lacey, who lives her life trying to please everyone.
Lacey is lost. She's lost herself in this world where she thinks that her value is equivalent to her points.
2 stars? 2 stars?
Wasn't a meaningful encounter.
Everyone is a little bit heightened and false because everyone's terrified of being marked down because the consequences of that are unpleasant. So it's basically the world we live in.
So I disagree with the producer. We're not in that world now, but this is exactly what regulators want to make sure does not happen. So things like gathering information about users or your customers in spaces that are unrelated to your business and are not interacting with your own assets is an example of social scoring, which is the type of prohibited AI that must stop in Europe by February 2nd, but also is in the offing to be prohibited in 6 continents. We talked about low risk, and that's, you know, like the suggested product suggestions and so forth. The governance around that is very straightforward. It's basically just calling for the companies to make it clear that the end user is interacting with an AI. That's all. So this is an example of that. Some companies like OpenAI and others, some tech companies, but this might be a good idea for others, also have terms where they explain, don't put things in that you think are hyper confidential, your medical information or trade secret information into this portal, because we can't guarantee that we can delete your prompts. And we also can't guarantee that a data breach may never happen to us. And so this would become available. So just being careful. The high risk AI use cases is where I really want to spend most of the time talking about, because this is where boards can be and executives such as yourself can be the most impactful. It's in the yellow light, the high risk use cases when you're triaging. There are actually 141 specific ones that are called out in the various legal frameworks. The thing I want to point out here is that this 141 is a moment in time. You're going to continuously need to stay up to date with where regulators are seeing high risk, so that not to check the box exercise, but to see whether there are things that you need to adjust in your governance program to avoid being a headline. Things that are high risk are, I'm not going to go through all 151, but briefly, it's the type of things that you expect. Children, healthcare, financial, employment, our critical infrastructure, our water supply, for example, energy, okay? Anything that's endemic to a person, race, gender, sexual orientation, for example, political positions, religious affinity. When you are in high risk, we've gone through and distilled this down, not just from the laws, but talking to the regulators themselves in Europe, in Africa, in the US. One of my colleagues is here on the phone. She's going to be attending a White House governance meeting on Monday, where we sit down with governmental officials and try to find out, when we see consensus in the legislation around the world, what are they trying to solve for? What risk? And then going in beyond that, speaking to the data scientists that the legislators have been relying on to find out technically what is the risk that they're trying to solve for. And from there, we have distilled and culled these 6 steps that will work to keep your company out of a headline in a negative way. So if you are building an application sitting on top of a large language model, they're looking for high quality data. And I call that like righteous data. If you were going to use the trust monogram, the R for in trust is righteous data. So it's high quality data, meaning you have rights, privacy rights to use the training data, you have IP rights to use the training data, and you have business rights to use the training data. And I want to pause here and because I get this question a lot. How am I supposed to know what, X, whatever tech company it is, what Microsoft, what Google, what AWS, what Meta has trained their model on? And for purposes of this discussion, You don't need to know what they've trained their model on. Your liability and your headline does not depend on that. It depends on what you put into the model yourself with your data. Okay, because ultimately, as I gave you the example with Rite Aid, your company's brand will be the one in the headline, not the tech companies, when you make an application on top of there. So step 2, high quality data for you and your company and what you're putting in your application. Step 3 is very important because it is different than anything we've ever seen before. This is continuous testing, monitoring, auditing against known guardrails. So I have companies all the time say, well, I do model management. I test my models on a regular basis. Maybe it's once a week, maybe it's once a month. And I want to use this image that AI actually created for me to explain to you why that will not be effective if you do that with generative AI. So think of this, what I asked AI to give me an image of model drift, and that is a state of the technology today. There isn't a generative AI model in the world today that does not do what I'm going to talk to you about. So think of this water as the internet and all of the data that we have in it. AI created this image for me. I would not make the water so placid. I would make it a roiling, almost like the water in Hurricane Milton in Miami. It's going to be moving. We have 175 zettabytes of stored data that has 21 zeros behind it in our internet. And every single day, we are generating globally another 2.5 quintillion bytes, that's 18 zeros behind it, of fresh new data. So this is not a placid water. It is a moving, roiling thing. And when a company such as yours builds an application on top of it, think of that as like, they have a computer sitting here with fins on it. I would think of it more like a sailboat. And you're on this roiling ocean. You have your sailboat, which is your app. It's next to a dock, and you're in actual kind of hurricane conditions. Would you expect, if you're the boat owner, to come back to the dock if you haven't docked that boat? It's just sitting next to the dock with not tethered to anything. Would you expect that boat to be back where it was a month later, a week later? Well, that's what we're asking companies to do with AI. So what the regulations are calling for, and they're going to be in effect 2 years from now. That's why I say, even though the legislation isn't final yet, it's actually ahead of where the tech is. Because what they're saying is, in this active movement environment, you need to tether your AI in advance to these areas that are most prone to harm people. And if they harm people, then it harms your brand. So things like accuracy. So let's go back to that analogy I was just telling you about the state of Tennessee, right? The judge ruled that their AI was inaccurately denying coverage to Medicaid beneficiaries, disabled children, elderly, et cetera. Actually, what accuracy means is a known standard. It's sitting on the federal website for Medicaid. Now, just reimagine that scenario and think of the water in the boat. If in advance, we weren't involved in this, but if global data innovation had been in place, we would have said in advance, take the Medicaid standards and code them in terms of code, zeros and ones that the AI can understand, into your AI application, so that if they are running in the background in continuous testing, monitoring, and auditing, so you are alerted as soon as it starts denying in areas that are in violation of your standards for accuracy. And the same thing can be said for privacy, cyber, IP. So you can see here the need for subject matter experts to provide the different tests that I showed you in the other slide.
And Dominique, are you seeing anything with like best practice around layering of AI, so that you have an AI overlooking another AI and another AI overlooking that AI?
Exactly. So this continuous testing, actually, think of it like sensors that are AI enabled. So your business people will tell you what accuracy means, and for a particular use case, they'll verbalize that for you, or what bias looks like for a particular use case, or health and antitrust. And then that gets turned into code, and AI can monitor that. and alert the humans in step 5 when the AI has departed from those standards. And there needs to be technical documentation of the continuous testing, because the humans, when they, when legislators asked them, what would you need, data scientists, to get a model back on track? They said, we need metadata and logging data so we can understand when the AI started to drift. So the humans on your AI team, these are the IT folks mostly, need the technical documentation of the continuous testing that's running every second of every minute of every day in the background on your AI to be able to determine when the AI started to drift and then get it back on track within the guardrails that the company has already set. And if the AI is incapable of getting back into those guardrails, they want a step 6, which is a fail-safe to kill that AI use case. So let me give this in practical terms to see how this actually works. I'm in Los Angeles. The Cedars-Sinai Hospital announced in January that they were able to use generative AI successfully for early detection of pancreatic cancer. And this is a huge thing, because pancreatic cancer, often thought of as like a sort of death sentence or a death diagnosis, if it's caught early, is very preventable and very curable. So this is a whole new lease on life. And how did Cedars-Sinai do this? They walked through the 6 steps that I just laid out for you. They had high quality data in their application. They knew they were in high risk because it's health. They had high quality data and rights to use that data. They continuously tested against what was accurate for that health use case, so they could know if the AI was going in the wrong direction. And then the AI produced a beautiful drift, which is the drift to get to early detection of pancreatic cancer, which is a good thing. Another example where AI, this is another example, DPD, which is a logistics company in the UK, very similar to our UPS and Federal Express. They had an AI that was a chatbot, that they were an early adopter of the chatbot technology to interact with their customers. That chatbot answered thousands of customer questions about where their packages were, doing great, such that literally it was 24/7 responses. Customers were thrilled. And then suddenly, about 9 months into the use of the chatbot, one customer came in, put in his tracking number, wanted to know what, when his package was coming. And suddenly the chatbot started cursing out the customer, criticizing the company for being the worst logistics company in the world, blame the company for letting go all of its real customer service employees and replacing them with this quote unquote useless chatbot. The CEO woke up to the name of the company trending on X, formerly Twitter, 2.2 million views and counting. There was a public, international coverage with Time Inc., The Guardian, BBC, etc. Fiasco with chatbot and the company's name, and etc. Okay, but just think back to the guardrails we talked about and reimagine the methodology that I'm discussing. What if someone had gone at the inception of this idea, someone had gone to the customer service supervisor and said, what are our no-nos? What is not supposed to happen on a customer service call? And what if that were coded in the AI in terms of zeros and ones at the outset, so that when the AI started cursing at the first customer, the company is alerted and can get the chatbot back on track rather than be a headline? That's what we're trying to get to. I didn't even include this slide in, but McDonald's, I just saw recently, decided to take all of their AI-enabled tools outside of their ordering platform in the US. Why? Because people got up to the ordering microphone, and the chatbot and the AI was misunderstanding soda for butter and etc., and nuggets for more. So thousands of nuggets were being prepared on one order over and over and over again. Air Canada had to honor flights for $1 that the chatbot pricing that the chatbot had made up. Rite Aid, we talked about already. United Healthcare, this is 2 years ago, their AI was accused of bias because the algorithm was associating having a lot of preventive care health records as being indicative of whether someone had a low tolerance for pain. So a lot of low income, minority, and women don't typically go in and get their preventive care as often. So when they came in sometimes for emergency treatment, the AI was not suggesting certain pain prevention treatments because the AI had correlated that those individuals had higher tolerances for pain. We also have situations, there is now a call for research going on because it was found that the ARPA, federal ARPA organization is doing a call for research for continuous testing, monitoring, and auditing because it was found that family physicians using AI to prompt diagnosis determinations and review x-rays, that the AIs were drifting about 90% of the time, and there's no continuous testing, monitoring, and auditing protocol yet for AI. They're relying on physicians to basically report the inaccuracy. I like to humanize where we get this drift from and why I'm talking about it. It's because I was pointed to these data scientists from regulators around the world as ones that they relied on. In the middle is Dr. Professor Suresh Venkatasubrahmanian. He is a professor at Brown University, formerly with the White House Office of Science, Technology, and Policy, and he wrote a 70-page technical companion to the AI Bill of Rights. Why do I raise it? Because he spoke at our Digital Trust Summit in 2023, and he just advised the whole audience of CEOs and board members that models drift, and there's not anything that they have currently available to be able to prevent drift. And so that if companies want to use generative AI models, that they're going to need to put these controls in place so they can control what the output is. Dr. Ellie Pavlik, and by the way, just here, I do have a podcast with Professor Suresh Venkatasubrahmanian from Forbes on my podcast called Trust, and that is available on my book website, which is just my full name, DominiqueSheltonLeipzig.com. Dr. Ellie Pavlik is a professor at Brown University also. She spends 20% of her time at Google DeepMinds. She's spoken at 2 of my Digital Trust Summits where we convene CEOs and board members to talk about these concepts and actionable governance. And she has also been studying model drift. And Malik Ninji over here on the left is running a lab. He just sold one of his companies to Eli Lilly for $407 million. But he has successfully, what he's doing now is taking the whole genomic stream and putting it inside a small language model that is very focused on accuracy. And he's working, he's double doctorate, quantum, et cetera. He's working, his partner in the lab is a Nobel laureate. Not to pick on any companies, but we're also seeing this coming up with revenue when there is drift that leads to surprises for consumers, that this gets to the investors' attention, and we've seen market cap go down. Now, we understand with the new administration, this executive order is likely to be, the AI executive order that President Biden put in place is likely to be repealed. But the reason I wanted to show this slide still is that the issues about accuracy or chatbots cursing out your customer or misidentifying paying customers as criminals, this has to do with your brand, not whether or not in the US we have a law or an executive order. This is about whether you want your brand to be associated with something that is not within your standards. We do have some state laws that will be going into effect that have been adopted in Colorado, which will go into effect in a couple of years. I told you about the consensus around the world. You can find these legal frameworks. Many of them are still in draft, but you can find them on my globaldatainnovation.com website. And I have a list for global legal frameworks, and you can click and see that they all call for the 6 things I mentioned. They call for a lot of other things, but what we pulled out are the 6 things that will keep you from not being the headline that I've discussed. Shareholders for public companies are getting increasingly interested about AI governance, and in particular, the board's oversight of AI. So we had 7 proxies this year. None of them were successful, but they were proposed to require companies to have annual AI assessments and to display on their website what the AI governance plan is and the company's oversight mechanisms for the board. So even though those proxies were not successful this time, we're totally expecting them to come back again next year. So think of this like your Caremark and McDonald's obligations for oversight, because this is exactly where it's headed. I just had somebody look for me. Out of the lawsuits, shareholder derivative lawsuits that have been brought in the past 12 months, 923 of them, 2/3 of them have involved privacy, cyber, or AI incidents already. So that's the reason why we want, and we're also seeing, and I talked about this at Conscious Capitalism, 8 CEOs have to resign this year in the past 12 months because of AI incidents that they weren't, the public wasn't ready for. The CEO of Sports Illustrated, the CEO of a nonprofit organization that was supposed to be providing, it was a nonprofit for eating disorders, and the chatbot was recommending diets for people that were coming in that suffered from bulimia and anorexia, for example. All right. So how do you keep in the headlines for the great things like Cedars-Sinai, and you avoid being the headlines that I talked about that are not consistent with the brands that you've worked so hard to create? So first question, do we have a cross-disciplinary AI team? You just go back to those guardrails I talked about: privacy, accuracy, cyber, IP rights, health and safety, antitrust, okay, bias. This is clearly, those 7 areas clearly require subject matter experts. I have boards and CEOs ask me all the time, well, where do I get these experts and what standards should they be using? And I always tell them, look to the values in your own corporation. I bet dollars to donuts there's somebody who's 100% focused on IP in your company. There's somebody 100% focused on cyber in your company. There's somebody who knows what the bias metric is and thinks about it all the time for your company. Just like United Healthcare, by the way, they had a chief medical equity officer that solves for these sorts of issues. It's just the AI governance team did not reach out to that chief equity medical officer to form a test to be able to verify the accuracy of the AI. So you need to burst through silos as a board member, and as a CEO, you need to encourage and require a busting through silos and getting a cross-disciplinary team working on your AI, or at least make sure your AI team knows to reach out to subject matter experts in the areas that could severely embarrass or harm the company. And, let me just pause here, one more thing on the cross-disciplinary team. I talked about DPD and the chatbot cursing out the customer, et cetera. That's one thing. But think about this. What if it was our water grid or our power supply, and the AI is drifting and someone does not know about it, such that our parts per million and what's safe for water drinking is compromised? So that's why this cross-disciplinary team and the right tests being put in proactively is so important. Second thing, are we risk ranking our AI? Are we doing the triage for the T in trust? Do we have the red light, the green light, the yellow light in place? It's one thing for us to risk rank according to our own standards, but have we taken a peek at where the laws are going so we know what regulators consider to be prohibited, what regulators consider to be high risk, and what regulators consider to be low risk? Then with that, do we have any prohibited or high risk use cases in our ecosystem? The reason I want to point out prohibited, because it's expensive to train your own application and do all this work. You don't want to do that, especially if you're a global company, in an area that's going to be prohibited in 6 continents in a couple of years. It's about future-proofing your investment. Is legal engaged, right? So Global Data Innovation is a legal advisory company for CEOs and board members. We're not a law firm, but you 100% are going to need to have a law firm in place at the ready to be able to tell you about, I've given you a snapshot in time, but new areas of high risk are going to be out there, and you need to be abreast of where these laws are going. Who is going to install the guardrails? All right. We talked about someone in the company being able to identify, like the chief, the supervisor for customer service calls will know what an accurate tone is for a call. But she can tell you that, or he can tell you that verbally. Who's going to put it into code into the AI itself so that your company can be alerted when the chatbot starts cursing or something else? So if you don't have data scientists that can do it, there are companies like BDO and others, consultants, that you can tell to code it in for you if you tell them the standard. And if not, there are others in my community of experts. Itesh is on our advisory board for the company, but there are others too in the community of experts that can help guide your company on how to get this in. Because having policies that sit aside and are not integrated with the technology is a recipe for disaster. And then do we continuously test, monitor, and audit against the guardrails that you have installed in by BDO or somebody? And then what's the human oversight plan once you find that the AI has drifted, which it will drift. Once it has drifted, who's going to fix it? Okay, so that's really all I wanted to say. I think I can take down the slides, and I just wanted to open it up. I don't know if there are questions. Anybody have anything? But I want this to be interactive, not just talking at you. How many people, I guess while I'm looking for questions, and maybe Betty, you could help me out. How many people feel like you have a little more information today than you did going in about what you can do as a board member, as a CEO, as a leader to influence the outcome here with your AI? And the main thing I want to get away from with this is helplessness. We don't need to, it's not a crapshoot, whether you're the headline and with, the grace of God, that could be you too. If you read something else about another company, this is the step to ensure you're on the upward trend, not the negative. Okay. So that's what I'm really committed to empowering our leaders